What's up, everybody, and welcome back. Today, we are going to dissect what the perfect strum looks like according to me. Now, this is just a technique that I've developed on my own. Could be right, could be wrong, could work for you, it could not. But ultimately what it is it's what I teach my students when they want to know what every element of their right arm and hand and wrist should be doing while strumming. Now, this refers specifically to how it should look while using a pick, so we'll talk about that, and we'll just talk about kind of what it should all look like. So, here we go. First things first, let's talk about our pick. Now, our pick should be an extension of our thumb, mostly kind of the left side here of our thumb. A lot of people, when they start out, they think that it should be an extension of this nail or this finger. We actually want to take this motion when we strum and apply it with a pick. And that's why the pick comes off the side of your thumb like that. Now, what that means is you're going to want to hold your pick kind of perpendicular to your thumb, maybe a little less so, and then tuck your finger in underneath it to hold it in place so you get this sort of a look, okay? And then it's that same motion with a pick. Now, there is some argument for closed hand versus open hand. I would say do whatever feels right to you personally. Again, some people may say this is wrong, but all of my perspectives on this are based off of watching people who are significantly more proficient than me play. And there are people who play closed-handed who are really, really good, and there are people who play open-handed who are really, really good. So there's probably something there. Try them both. Now that we've got our picking hands situated, let's talk about what each element of our arm should be doing. I break it down into 3 different parts. You have your arm, you have your wrist, and then you have your fingers. Each of these has a specific role where they all need to work together in order to create a good strum. So first things first, the arm. The arm should be gently rocking, about this much movement. If you notice up here, it's not moving all that much, but that means a lot down here at the wrist. So it should be a very gentle rock here. And a lot of times this rock will be in beat with the music that you're playing, right? Your wrist is what's responsible for creating all of the intricacies and the subdivisions that you hear across your strumming pattern. So, number 1, this part of your arm is there to create the initial momentum. Number 2, we have our wrist. And the wrist is responsible for taking that momentum and snapping it through the strings. A lot of times we actually refer to how we play guitar in terms of trying to mimic a piano. When you play a piano, you're able to use all your fingers to push down multiple notes at the same time. With guitar, you really can't do that. So the closest way that we can mimic that is by trying to flick or snap our pick through the strings of the guitar. It's the difference between letting the momentum of your arm work and snapping that momentum through. Here's without the snap. Here's with the snap. It's a very slight discrepancy, but what it does is it makes it feel a little bit more rhythmic, a little bit more clear, right? Without that wrist snapping, it was kind of muddy and floppy and sloppy, and that's not really what we want to hear in most situations. So with that, we now have our momentum and our snap. The final and possibly most significant thing here has to do with your fingers. Now, I like to think of them as sort of shock absorbers. For everything that's going on up here, we need something to kind of cushion the blow when it hits the strings. And that is done by how hard or soft you're gripping that pick. If you hold it too hard, you end up playing really loud and really aggressively, and there's no real variation there. If you hold it too soft, most of the time your pick will start spinning around in your fingers, or you'll drop it, or it just sounds kind of loose. Here's too hard. Really aggressive. I think it might have even redlined my mic. And here's too soft. You can hear the pick is starting to fall out of my hands and hit the guitar and do all sorts of things that we don't want it to do. It also just sounds a little weak. So that is why we want to make sure that we find this balance, and everyone's going to have to find their own balance, and everyone's going to have a different thickness of pick. We can talk about, what a pick does for your tone at a different time, but the main thing is that everything about your right arm controls your identity as a player, especially your fingers. So, to summarize, when it comes to strumming, we have the momentum being pushed by this part of your arm, the snap being done by your wrist, and then the cushion or the dynamic control coming from your fingers. This is what a perfect strum should sound like. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to figure out how does that relate to when we have to pluck single notes. And if you'll notice right away, my arm kind of stops moving. Now, there are a lot of guitarists out there who you'll see who play single notes with their arm. Personally, I feel like it's a little too much muscle for such a finite controlled job. So what I say is to take those three rolls, the momentum, the snap, and our cushion with our fingers or our dynamic control, and to isolate it down to just your wrist and your fingers. Your wrist is now kind of doing double duty. It's snapping as well as providing the momentum. And then your fingers are going to be responsible for that dynamic finite control that we talked about. It will look something like this. Even when we go up and down, it's just this nice, almost like small wave motion. And that's what we want to see when we're trying to do a perfect strum. Now, I don't necessarily want to get into all the directional picking that a lot of people talk about, as this is geared more towards people who are still trying to figure out what this all should be doing on a basic, simple song before they get into, how do I become Shreddy McGee? So for the most part, what we want to see is just this nice, smooth, and it works really nicely. Now, if you go back and watch that intro video, what you'll see is that at the times where I'm having to pluck individual strings, I actually stop and my wrist comes more into play. And then when I have to strum, it opens back up and my arm gets involved. And it should sound like this. So there you have it. In summary, our arm is responsible for our momentum, our wrist is responsible for snapping that momentum through the strings, and our fingers are responsible for controlling the pick and making sure that it sounds good and even, that the dynamics are there, and that it's not too aggressive but also not too soft. When we play single notes, we isolate it down to just our wrist. Our wrist does double duty on momentum and snap, and then our fingers are responsible still for that dynamic control. I hope this was helpful for some of you. Again, this is not something that I think applies to every single guitarist. I have yet to find a definitive way to do this that every guitarist can agree upon, and that's just kind of the nature of the instrument. So experiment with it, see what works for you. Let me know in the comments what you like, or if there's something that you think could be done differently. I'd love to try it out. And of course, feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks so much. We'll see you around.